This presentation will cover the topic of inheritance. Scientifically speaking, inheritance is the transfer of genetically determined characteristics from one generation to another. Genetics is the study of the mechanisms responsible for inheritance. A person's genotype is made of their 46 chromosomes and the genes that are carried on those chromosomes. This is different from the phenotype, which is the physical or physiological manifestation of the genotype. This image is of a karyotype, a picture of an individual's chromosomes. They should be in pairs, known as homologous chromosomes. See how there are 2 of chromosome 1, 2, or chromosome 9. Some of these chromosomes, or one of these chromosomes, comes from the mother and one from the father. Chromosomes 1 through 22 are called autosomal chromosomes, and the X and Y are called sex chromosomes. However, they do more than just determine gender. This individual is a male because there is an X and a Y chromosome. A female would have 2 X chromosomes. Each chromosome contains several genes. Recall that a gene is all the nucleotides needed to code for one protein. Where each gene is located is called its locus, and different forms of the same gene are called alleles. For example, the gene for type A or type B blood are different alleles of the same gene. If a person has 2 of the same gene, let's say AA, they are homozygous for that gene. If they have 2 different alleles, say AB, they are heterozygous for that gene. Patterns of inheritance can be complicated or fairly straightforward. In simple inheritance, a single pair of alleles codes for a certain phenotype. This can happen through strict dominance or codominance. In strict dominance, one allele is dominant over the other, called the recessive allele. The dominant allele is indicated by a capital letter, and the recessive allele is indicated by a lowercase letter. Traits passed on by simple inheritance can be mapped out using a Punnett square. Some examples are the presence of freckles, red hair, or the condition albinism. For freckles, the allele for having freckles is dominant over the non-freckle allele. So a person's genotype could be capital F lowercase f or 2 capital Fs. Only one dominant allele is needed in the genotype for the person to express freckles in their phenotype. Both red hair and albinism are recessive traits, so both alleles need to be recessive for the individual to express that trait in their phenotype. Here are 3 blank Punnett squares. Let's work through the freckle example to see how they might be passed on. First, we're going to place the mom's alleles at the top and the dad's alleles at the side. And then each square is going to represent the 4 genetic possibilities that each offspring could inherit. The freckle gene is dominant and the non-freckle gene is recessive. So here are 3 scenarios. First, mom is homozygous dominant and dad is homozygous recessive. Second, both mom and dad are heterozygous. And in the third, mom is heterozygous and dad is homozygous recessive again. For both genotypes homozygous dominant and heterozygous, the phenotype will express freckles. In our first example, each offspring will be heterozygous. They will display the phenotype freckles. In the second example, each offspring has a 50% chance of being heterozygous, a 25% chance of being heterozygous dominant, and a 25% chance of being heterozygous recessive. The homozygous recessive possibility is the only one that will express the phenotype of no freckles. In the third example, each offspring has a 50% chance of being heterozygous and a 50% chance of being homozygous. So they have a 50-50 chance of having freckles or no freckles in their phenotype. The other example of simple inheritance is codominance. This is when one allele is not dominant over another. The heterozygous individual expresses both genes in their phenotype. Examples of this include the AB blood type and certain albumin structures. Let's look at two scenarios for blood type. First, both examples will express the same phenotype. Mom is type B and dad is type A. But notice that the genotype in the first example is homozygous for each, and in the second example, each individual is heterozygous. We place an O in the other spot. In the first example, each offspring will express the blood type AB, because neither is dominant over the other. In the second example, each offspring has a 25% chance of being type AB, type B, type A, or type O. The A and B alleles are dominant over the O, but codominant to each other. Polygenic inheritance is a little more complicated. This is when several genes interact to produce a particular phenotype. Examples of this include hair colors other than blonde or red, skin and eye color, and height. Usually these traits cannot be predicted using a Punnett square. Another form of inheritance is sex-linked inheritance. The allele responsible for the trait is located on either the X or Y chromosome. Most of these are X-linked, and most are recessive. Because of these two things, most X-linked recessive characteristics are seen in the male, and the female is a carrier. It is possible for the female to inherit an X-linked recessive trait, but it is less likely. Examples include red-green color blindness, some forms of the bleeding disease hemophilia, and Duchenne muscular dystrophy. This is how it works. In the first example, mom has two X chromosomes with the dominant normal vision allele, and dad has one X chromosome with the normal vision allele and a Y with no matching allele at all. Their female offspring will have normal vision, and so will the male offspring because they will inherit the normal vision allele on their one X chromosome. In the second example, mom is heterozygous or a carrier of the colorblind gene, and dad has the normal vision allele on his one X chromosome. Their female offspring will have normal vision, but with a 50% chance of being homozygous or heterozygous, a carrier of the colorblind gene. And their male offspring will have a 50% chance of having normal vision or being colorblind. In the third example, mom is a carrier or being heterozygous, and dad is colorblind. Their female offspring have a 50% chance of either expressing the phenotype of normal vision but being a carrier, or being homozygous recessive and therefore colorblind. Their male offspring have a 50% chance of having normal vision or being colorblind. So I hope you can see why males are more likely to inherit an X-linked recessive trait, because they don't have the other X with a dominant allele to counteract the recessive allele. Here are just a few examples of chromosomal abnormalities. In trisomy 21, more commonly known as Down syndrome, there are 3 copies of the 21st chromosome. There are some other abnormalities caused by having only one copy of a particular chromosome as well. Klinefelter syndrome is when an individual has 3 sex chromosomes, XXY. Because they have a Y, they are genetically male, but because they have 2 X chromosomes, the testes usually don't develop and their breasts are enlarged. This leads to sterility. And in Turner syndrome, the individual is XO, only having 1 X chromosome. Due to that X, they are genetically female, but at puberty they fail to develop the usual female characteristics. Their ovaries are non-functional due to very low estrogen levels. Scientists have mapped out the human genome, or the full set of all the genetic material on our chromosomes. Not only can they identify which traits are on what chromosomes, they can identify their loci as well. Because a gene is made up of all the nucleotides needed to code for one protein, they can also list the person's nucleotides.